The Xalzor Empire had ruled the stars for centuries. Their fleet was the strongest in the galaxy, their technology far beyond most species. No one dared to challenge them. But today, something strange was happening. Admiral Varkin stood on the bridge of his massive warship, looking at the holographic screen in front of him. 10,000 Xalzor warships floated in space, ready for battle. Their weapons were armed, their shields were raised. They had been preparing for this moment for weeks. The mission was simple: wipe out the humans. But then, something unexpected happened. A single human ship appeared on their scanners. Just one. At first, the Xalzor officers thought it was a mistake. Maybe more human ships were hiding, using some kind of trick. But the sensors confirmed it. There was only one ship. Admiral Varkin laughed, a deep, rumbling sound that echoed through the command center. "Is this a joke?" he said. "Do the humans think one ship can stand against the might of the Xalzor Empire?" The officers around him chuckled as well. Some shook their heads in disbelief. The Xalzor had fought many battles, but never had they seen such foolishness. A single ship against 10,000. It was suicide. The human ship, identified as HSS Titan, did not run. It did not turn back. Instead, it moved forward, slowly but fearlessly. Admiral Varkin smirked. "Destroy it," he ordered. Thousands of plasma cannons locked onto the Titan. In an instant, the Xalzor fleet unleashed a storm of energy blasts. The darkness of space was filled with bright flashes of green and red light. Explosions erupted around the Titan, covering it in smoke and fire. Varkin watched with satisfaction. No ship, no matter how advanced, could survive that level of firepower. The battle was over before it even began. But then, something strange happened. The smoke cleared. The Titan was still there, untouched. A deep silence fell over the Xalzor warships. Varkin's smirk disappeared. His yellow eyes narrowed as he stared at the screen. This was impossible. No ship could survive that. "Check the readings," he snapped. "Did we hit it?" The officers scrambled to analyze the data. A few seconds later, one of them hesitated before speaking. We hit it, Admiral. But the attacks had no effect." Varkin clenched his fists. That made no sense. The Xalzor weapons were the most powerful in the galaxy. They could destroy entire planets. And yet, this human ship had survived without a scratch. On the Titan, Captain Ethan Cole sat calmly in his command chair, watching the enemy fleet. The Xalzor had fired everything they had, but it didn't matter. The Titan's experimental energy shield absorbed the attacks, converting them into power. Now, the Titan was stronger than before. Cole smiled. "Their mistake," he said. The Xalzor fleet was still frozen in shock. No one fired again. No one moved. It was the first time they had ever faced something they didn't understand. Then, the Titan fired back. A single energy beam, bright blue and crackling with power, shot from the front of the human ship. It moved so fast that the Xalzor barely had time to react. The beam hit one of the Xalzor warships, a massive battleship nearly a mile long. There was a bright flash, then silence. The ship exploded instantly, breaking apart like it was made of glass. But that wasn't the shocking part. The explosion spread. The energy jumped from one ship to another, a chain reaction moving at lightning speed. Within seconds, 100 Xalzor warships were gone. Admiral Varkin stared in disbelief. One shot, one human attack, 100 warships destroyed. This wasn't possible. The Xalzor were the strongest warriors in the galaxy. They had won every battle they had ever fought. But now, in front of their eyes, their mighty fleet was crumbling. The officers around Varkin panicked. Some began shouting, demanding to know what was happening. Others stood frozen, unable to process what they had just seen. Varkin slammed his fist on the control panel. "Regroup the fleet," he roared. "Surround the human ship. Destroy it." The Salzor warships started moving, forming a tight circle around the Titan. If they could surround it, maybe they could overwhelm it. Maybe their weapons would work if they fired all at once. But before they could execute their plan, the Titan disappeared from their sensors. It was just gone. Varkan's eyes widened. Where did it go? The officers frantically checked the scanners, but the Titan had vanished. It was no longer in front of them. It was no longer anywhere. Then, a voice came through the Salzor communication channel. A human voice. Calm. Confident. "You should have left Earth alone," Captain Cole said. And then, before anyone could react, the Salzor warships started exploding again. Admiral Varkan stood motionless on the command deck of his warship, his mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. 100 Salzor warships had been destroyed in seconds. A single human vessel, something so small and insignificant compared to the mighty Salzor fleet, had wiped out part of their armada with one shot. That was not just unexpected. It was impossible. The command center was filled with panicked voices. Officers yelled over each other, trying to regain control of the situation. Some were barking orders to their ships to reposition. Others desperately scanned the battlefield for any sign of weakness in the enemy. But none of them had an answer for the one question that mattered most. How was the Titan doing this? Varkan's claws dug into the control panel as he forced himself to stay calm. "Get me a full scan of that ship," he ordered, his voice sharp and commanding. "I want to know what kind of technology the humans are using." The officers scrambled to obey. Moments later, the results came in. One of the analysts, a younger officer with shaking hands, hesitated before speaking. "Admiral, our scans show that the human ship is absorbing energy." Varkan narrowed his eyes. "Explain." The officer swallowed hard. "It's their shields, sir. They aren't just blocking our attacks. They are using them. Every time we fire, we are feeding their power. Our weapons are making them stronger." A heavy silence filled the room. Varkan's stomach twisted. He had fought countless battles, but never had he faced an enemy that grew stronger the more he attacked it. The Salzor Empire was built on overwhelming firepower, crushing enemies through sheer force. But now, that same strategy was being turned against them. Then, without warning, the Titan reappeared. It had moved, somehow without detection, and was now right in the middle of the Salzor formation. Before the fleet could react, the human ship fired again. A brilliant blue energy wave rippled outward, engulfing hundreds of Salzor warships at once. The air inside Varkan's warship vibrated from the sheer force of the explosion. The viewing screen flickered as massive warships, each a masterpiece of Salzor engineering, were torn apart like paper in a storm. This time, 500 ships were gone in an instant. The fleet was in chaos. Some ships broke formation, their captains ignoring orders and retreating. Others fired wildly into the darkness, hoping to hit something, anything. But nothing worked. The Titan was too fast, too powerful, too untouchable. "Order the fleet to focus fire," Varkan roared. "Everything we have. Target their engines." Across the Salzor armada, weapons locked onto the Titan. Thousands of plasma cannons, ion turrets, and missile launchers fired at once, unleashing an apocalyptic barrage. The space around the Titan burned with fire and energy, a storm of destruction so intense that nothing could survive it. And yet, the Titan did not fall. The ship emerged from the flames, unharmed, as if the Salzor had fired nothing but air. A voice came through the Salzor communication channels. Captain Cole's voice. Calm, steady, almost amused. "That was cute," he said. "My turn." The Titan vanished again. Varkan's claws dug deeper into the metal panel. His heart pounded. This wasn't a battle. This was a slaughter, and the Salzor were the prey. Then, without warning, the human ship reappeared, this time directly behind the Salzor command ship. It had outmaneuvered their entire fleet. Alarms blared as the officers scrambled in panic. Varkan turned sharply to his crew. evasive maneuvers. Now, too late. A new energy surge erupted from the Titan, this time aimed at the command warships, the core of the Xalzor fleet. Within seconds, hundreds of them exploded in brilliant flashes of blue and red. Varkin's warship shook violently, warning lights flashing across every control panel. The blast had crippled the fleet's leadership, leaving thousands of Xalzor ships without direction. Varkin gritted his teeth. He had underestimated the humans. That was clear. He could not afford to do so again. "Pull back," he growled. "Regroup. We need a new strategy." But deep down, for the first time in his long career, he was afraid. The battlefield was no longer a place of dominance for the Xalzor. It had become a nightmare, a graveyard of their own making. Where once 10,000 warships had floated in perfect formation, now there was only destruction. Fire and debris drifted through the void, the wreckage of ships that had once symbolized the greatest military force in the galaxy. And in the center of it all, untouched, undefeated, was the Titan. Admiral Varkin gripped the edge of his command panel, his mind racing. How could this be happening? The humans were supposed to be weaker. Their technology was supposed to be inferior. And yet, the Titan was standing against the full force of the Xalzor fleet, and winning. Around him, his officers were in chaos. Some barked orders, others scrambled to understand the enemy ship's tactics. Many simply stared at the screens, paralyzed by fear. The Xalzor were not used to fear. They were the conquerors, the rulers of the stars. But now, they were prey. "Admiral," one of the officers shouted, snapping Varkin out of his daze. "Our fleet is breaking apart. Over 2,000 warships have been destroyed." Varkin's eyes darted to the holographic display. It was worse than he thought. The Titan was moving too fast, striking from the shadows before vanishing again. It wasn't fighting a traditional battle. It was hunting them. The Xalzor were used to wars of strength, overwhelming firepower, superior numbers, brutal efficiency. But this was different. This was psychological warfare. The Titan was making them afraid to fight. Varkin slammed his fist on the panel. "Hold the formation. No ship retreats without my order." But even as he gave the command, his ships continued to falter. Some captains disobeyed, turning their warships and fleeing into deep space. Others hesitated, afraid to move at all. The once mighty Xalzor fleet was falling apart, not just physically, but mentally. The Titan reappeared in the middle of a squadron of battleships. It fired a pulse weapon, a wave of energy that rippled outward like a tsunami. 500 ships shut down instantly, their engines, weapons, and shields all deactivated in a single moment. They were helpless. Then the Titan fired again. This time, it wasn't an energy blast. It was a message, a direct transmission broadcast to every Xalzor ship in the fleet. Varkin's screen flickered, and suddenly, he was face to face with the human captain. Captain Ethan Cole sat calmly in his command chair. There was no anger in his face, no arrogance, just cold certainty. "You should have left us alone," Cole said. His voice was steady, unwavering. "You thought this would be an easy victory, but you made a mistake." Varkin bared his teeth. "You think one ship can defeat an empire?" Cole tilted his head slightly, as if considering the question. "I don't need to defeat your empire. I just need to make sure you never come near Earth again." Before Varkin could respond, the transmission cut out. The Titan moved again, vanishing from sight. Varkin's hands curled into fists. He had never felt so powerless. He was an admiral of the greatest fleet in the galaxy, and yet he had no idea where his enemy was, when they would strike, or how to stop them. Then, all at once, the panic spread. Across the fleet, Xalzor soldiers began breaking discipline. Entire warships, thousands of them, abandoned the fight. Crews ignored orders. Pilots turned their ships and fled. Officers screamed at their soldiers to stand their ground, but it was too late. The Xalzor, the undefeated warriors of the stars, were running for their lives. Varkin felt his blood boil. He would not allow this. Not in his fleet. Not in his lifetime. Any ship that retreats will be destroyed. He roared. We will not run from one human vessel. But his words carried no weight. The fear was stronger than his command. Then a new alert blared through the ship. The Titan had returned. This time, it was right behind his flagship. Varkin turned, eyes wide, as the viewing screen displayed the impossible. The human ship, still untouched, was charging its main cannon. Varkin had one final thought before the blast hit. This was not just a battle. This was a message to the galaxy. The blast hit like a hammer from the gods. A wave of pure energy engulfed the Salzor flagship, shaking it to its core. The force of the impact sent crew members flying, consoles exploding in a storm of sparks. Warning sirens howled through the command deck as Admiral Varkin struggled to keep his footing. The entire ship groaned under the strain, its reinforced hull barely holding together. A dozen critical systems failed in an instant. Shields, weapons, navigation, everything was collapsing. Smoke filled the air as panicked officers scrambled to regain control, their reptilian faces twisted with terror. Varkin gritted his teeth and slammed his fist against the nearest console. Damage report. An officer coughed, his voice shaky. Shields down, weapons offline, engine core destabilizing. He hesitated. Admiral, we can't fight. Varkin's claws tightened into the metal panel beneath him. Those were words he had never heard spoken on a Salzor warship. Another explosion rocked the ship, and for the first time in his long career, Varkin felt something deep in his gut. Not anger, not rage, but something far worse. Fear. He had spent his entire life as a warrior. He had led conquests across countless star systems, crushed entire civilizations beneath the might of the Salzor Empire. They were supposed to be invincible. And yet here he was, broken, defeated, by a single human ship. The Titan was still there, hovering outside like a specter of death, its sleek black hull untouched by the battle. Its weapons were still charged, still waiting. And the message was clear. The next shot would be the last. Varkin could hear the panicked voices of his officers. Some were whispering among themselves, talking about surrender. Others had already made their decision. Escape pods were being launched, desperate soldiers abandoning ship before the Titan struck again. Hold your ground, Varkin snarled. I am your admiral. We do not surrender. But his words meant nothing now. The Salzor had never been in this position before. They had never lost. They didn't know how to handle it. The fear was consuming them, and the humans knew it. Another transmission appeared on the view screen. Captain Ethan Cole's face was once again staring at them. He still wasn't smiling. He didn't need to. His ship had already spoken for him. Admiral, Cole said, his voice as calm as ever. This is your last chance. Varkin snarled, baring his fangs. You expect me to beg for my life? Cole tilted his head slightly. No, he said. I expect you to understand. The Salzor admiral breathed heavily, his body shaking with rage. Understand. What was there to understand? That his empire had been humiliated. That his fleet, the greatest in the galaxy, had been torn apart like insects beneath a boot. The Titan's weapons hummed again, a low and deadly vibration that sent a chill through every Salzor soldier. Cole continued, You came here thinking humans were weak. That we would break. That we would kneel. He leaned forward slightly. You thought you could wipe us out. That we wouldn't fight back. Varkin clenched his fists. But you were wrong, Cole said. We adapt. We survive. And when you push us far enough, his expression darkened. We don't just fight back. We make sure you never try again. The words hit harder than any weapon. The Salzor had conquered hundreds of worlds. Every species they encountered had either submitted or been erased. But humanity was different. They didn't just resist. They won. Varkin glanced at the battlefield one last time. His fleet, once a symbol of terror and power, was now nothing but burning wreckage. His empire's greatest armada had been reduced to dust, and all of it had happened in a matter of minutes. The Titan hadn't just defeated them. It had sent a message to every species watching from the shadows. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was something else entirely. Varkin's breathing slowed. His rage burned away, leaving only cold acceptance. He had lost. He had truly lost. The officers on the bridge stared at him, waiting. Some still held on to pride, onto the belief that they could somehow turn this around. But Varkin knew better. There was no turning back. He exhaled and gave the only order left to give. "Stand down." Gasps echoed through the command deck. Some officers looked horrified, others relieved. Varkin looked back at the screen, into the human captain's eyes. "You win," he said bitterly. "The Salzor fleet surrenders." For the first time, Cole gave a small nod. "Good choice," he said. The transmission ended. The Titan's weapons powered down. The battlefield went silent. And in that moment, Admiral Varkin understood the truth. The Salzor were no longer the galaxy's apex predators. That title now belonged to humanity. The surrender of the Salzor fleet echoed across the galaxy like a shockwave. The impossible had happened. The undefeatable armada of the Salzor Empire, the military force that had crushed civilizations and rewritten the laws of war, had been broken by a single human warship, the Titan, a lone vessel from a species the Salzor had once dismissed as insignificant, had shattered 10,000 warships in a battle that lasted mere minutes. News of the defeat spread rapidly. Across the galaxy, species that had once feared the Salzor watched in stunned silence. Some had been planning their surrender to the Empire, believing resistance to be futile. Others had already suffered under Salzor rule, their worlds reduced to mere colonies, their people living as second-class citizens. But now, the impossible had become reality. The Empire was not invincible. The Salzor could lose, and humanity had just proven it. On the bridge of the Titan, Captain Ethan Cole observed the battlefield with sharp, calculating eyes. This was only the beginning. The Salzor had chosen this fight. They had come to wipe out humanity, to burn Earth and leave nothing behind. But they had underestimated their enemy. They had believed their size, their numbers, and their overwhelming firepower would guarantee victory. And now thousands of their warships lay in ruins. Their fleet, once a symbol of fear, was nothing but wreckage drifting in the void. Cole took a deep breath. The battle was over, but he knew that war had only just begun. "Incoming transmission, Captain," his comm officer reported. "From Admiral Varkin." Cole nodded. "Put him through." The view screen flickered, and Varkin's defeated face appeared. He no longer looked like the ruthless conqueror who had once commanded an empire's fleet. His scaled face was bruised, his eyes sunken with exhaustion. The weight of his loss had crushed him. "You spared us," Varkin said slowly. "Why?" Cole folded his arms. "Because wiping you out would be too easy." Varkin's expression twisted with frustration. "You mock me." "No," Cole said. "I want you to live long enough to understand. The Salzor built their empire on war. You never lost, so you believed you couldn't. You crushed species that were weaker than you and called it dominance." He leaned forward slightly, his voice sharp. "But now you've seen what happens when you pick a fight with someone who fights back." Varkin was silent. Cole continued. "You thought we were weak. You thought you could erase us. Instead, you just proved to the entire galaxy that the Salzor can be beaten." The words cut deeper than any weapon. For the first time in his life, Varkin was forced to see reality. The Salzor's reputation had been shattered. Their empire had ruled through fear, through the belief that no one could stand against them. But now, every species in the galaxy knew the truth. The Salzor could be defeated, and humanity had done it effortlessly. Varkin exhaled, his body heavy with the weight of his failure. "What happens now?" Cole's expression remained unreadable. "That depends on you." The Salzor admiral narrowed his eyes. You think we will surrender Earth without a fight? Cole smiled slightly. You're assuming you still have a choice. Before Varkin could reply, a new alert blared across the Titan's command deck. A second fleet was approaching. Salzor reinforcements. Over 20,000 warships. Varkin straightened slightly, some of his old arrogance returning. Looks like you spoke too soon, human. Cole turned to his tactical officer. Status. The officer glanced at the readings. Massive fleet inbound, sir. They're moving fast. A pause. But something's wrong. Varkin's smugness faded. What do you mean? The officer adjusted the display. They're not coming to attack. He hesitated. They're retreating. Varkin's blood went cold. No, that's impossible. But the readings didn't lie. The reinforcements weren't charging in for battle. They were fleeing. The Salzor reinforcements had expected to find a victorious fleet waiting for them. Instead, they had arrived to see the remains of 10,000 destroyed warships, a battlefield littered with the corpses of their strongest warriors. And at the center of it all, the Titan remained untouched. The reinforcements had no desire to face whatever power had done this. So they were turning away, abandoning the battle, abandoning the Empire's greatest fleet. Varkin could barely breathe. His own people were leaving him behind. Cole tilted his head slightly. Looks like they don't believe in you anymore, Admiral. Varkin clenched his fists, his claws digging into his palms. This was worse than defeat. This was humiliation. And worst of all, the galaxy was watching. The silence in the Salzor flagship was deafening. Varkin stared at the tactical display, watching in horror as his reinforcements, the second wave of the Empire's strongest warships, turned and fled. They hadn't even fired a single shot. They hadn't come to avenge their fallen comrades. They had arrived, seen the destruction, and decided that nothing, not even the wrath of their own empire, was worth facing whatever force had done this. And that force was one human ship. The Titan remained motionless, floating like a predator that had already chosen its prey. It did not chase the fleeing warships. It didn't need to. The message had already been sent. The Salzor were afraid. Varkin clenched his jaw, his claws digging into the metal console. This was worse than a massacre. It was a psychological execution. They hadn't just lost the battle. They had lost their empire's greatest weapon, fear. For centuries, the Salzor had ruled the galaxy by ensuring that no species ever dared to resist. The very thought of defying the empire had been unthinkable. But now the entire galaxy had seen something no one had ever witnessed before. The Salzor running. The Salzor losing. The Salzor afraid. Varkin forced himself to stand tall, ignoring the panic on the bridge around him. His officers no longer looked to him for orders. They whispered among themselves, their belief in their own superiority shattered beyond repair. The Empire would not recover from this. Not easily. Perhaps not at all. And humanity knew it. Captain Ethan Cole appeared on the main view screen once more, his expression unreadable. He didn't gloat. He didn't celebrate. That made it even worse. "This is over, Admiral," Cole said, his voice calm, steady. "Your fleet is broken. Your reinforcements have abandoned you. There is no war left to fight." Varkin's throat tightened. His mind raced for some kind of response, some final act of defiance. But there was nothing. Cole continued, his gaze unwavering. "I'm going to let you leave, Varkin. You and whatever is left of your command. But before you do, you're going to carry a message back to your leaders." The Salzor admiral's jaw tightened. "And what message is that?" Cole leaned forward, his eyes like steel. "Humanity is not to be touched. Ever again." The words sent a chill through Varkin's body. "You came here thinking you could burn us out of existence," Cole went on. "But you don't understand humans, Admiral. We don't just survive." His voice dropped lower, more dangerous. "When you push us to the edge, we become something else. Varkan felt something unfamiliar twisting in his gut. True fear. Your empire has a choice now, Cole said. You can leave Earth alone and live. He paused. Or you can keep pushing us and find out what happens when we stop holding back. Varkan inhaled sharply. He could hear the weight in those words. The Titan hadn't unleashed its full power. This was mercy. The human ship had chosen to spare them, to let them crawl away and tell the story. Varkan had fought 1,000 battles, crushed 100 species, and yet he had never encountered an enemy like this. The Xalzor had come expecting an easy war. Instead, they had awakened something terrifying. Cole's expression hardened. So go, Admiral. Crawl back to your empire. Tell them what you saw here. Varkan's claws trembled against the metal panel. His pride, his rage, his arrogance, all of it was meaningless now. Because the truth was undeniable. Humanity was not just another species. Humanity was something far worse. And if the Xalzor made the mistake of returning, the next time, there would be no mercy. The Xalzor fleet limped away, dragging what remained of its shattered forces through the void. The once mighty armada had been reduced to a graveyard of wreckage. The Empire's most decorated warriors, its most advanced warships, had been torn apart by one human vessel. And now, all that remained was a broken admiral and a simple message. Varkan sat in silence in his personal chambers aboard his crippled flagship. The once pristine walls were scorched, the scent of burnt circuits and blood lingering in the air. His own officers avoided meeting his gaze. Some had abandoned their posts entirely, escaping in the chaos. He could still hear the final words of the human captain echoing in his mind. Tell them what you saw here. The truth was unbearable. The Xalzor were supposed to be the apex predators of the galaxy. They had conquered world after world, leaving nothing but submission and destruction in their wake. Every species they encountered had fallen before them. Until now. Until humanity. Varkan's claws dug into the metal armrests of his chair. The rage inside him boiled, but there was no outlet for it. There was no enemy left to destroy. Only his own failure. His fleet had been erased. And the reinforcements, they had turned away. Not because of cowardice. No, they had done something far worse. They had calculated their chances of survival, and they had chosen to run. Because facing one human warship was too great a risk. Varkan knew that the moment he returned to the Xalzor homeworld, he would be summoned before the Grand War Council. They would demand explanations. They would demand vengeance. But what could he tell them? That one ship had destroyed 10,000 of theirs. That the Empire's greatest warriors had been powerless. They wouldn't believe him. Not at first. But the battlefield remained. The wreckage of the Xalzor fleet would be a testament to what had happened here. Word would spread. Other species had seen. Other civilizations had watched. And for the first time in history, they would begin to wonder. If the Xalzor could be beaten, then maybe they weren't gods of war after all. Maybe, just maybe, they were nothing more than another empire destined to fall. Varkan exhaled sharply. His anger was no longer directed at the humans. No, it was directed at himself, at his arrogance, his belief in Xalzor supremacy. He had made the fatal mistake of underestimating an enemy he didn't understand. And now, the consequences would shape the future of the entire galaxy. He turned toward the comms officer. Prepare a transmission for the Grand War Council. The officer hesitated, his face pale. Admiral, what will you tell them? Varkan's gaze was distant, his voice hollow. The truth. The Xalzor were no longer the most feared force in the galaxy. That title now belonged to humanity, and the Empire had a decision to make. They could retreat, lick their wounds, and pray that humans would leave them alone. Or they could push forward, try again, test their strength against the one species that had proven capable of stopping them. Varkan already knew what the Grand War Council would decide. They would not accept defeat. They would not accept humiliation. They would come again. But this time, The war wouldn't be fought in a single battle. This time, it would be a war for survival itself. And Varkan, he would be the one leading it. He didn't know if the Xalzor could win. He didn't even know if their empire would survive what was coming. But one thing was certain: humanity had changed the galaxy forever.